My phone buzzed against my chest like a dying insect right in the middle of the champagne toast. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the glare of the crystal chandeliers. The message was from Brandon, my only son. It read simply, "You are done here. Do not come into the office tomorrow. Vanessa and I are taking the company in a new direction, and you are just in the way." I looked up across the crowded ballroom. There they were. Brandon holding a glass of vintage Dom Perignon, his arm around Vanessa, his wife. They were smiling at me, a cold, triumphant smile that said they had finally won. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass. I did not storm the stage to remind everyone that I built Ford Logistics from a single rusted van 40 years ago. I just looked down at my phone and typed a single word. Okay. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket, turned my back on the applause, and walked out into the Seattle rain. I went home to my empty house. I opened my old laptop, the one with the cracked hinge, and I initiated the sequence I had written a decade ago for a day I prayed would never come. I locked the servers. I revoked the leases. I cut the financial lifelines. Then I went to sleep. When I woke up at 6 the next morning, the silence of my house was broken by the frantic buzzing on my nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification that made me smile for the first time in years. 88 missed calls. They thought they had fired me. They did not realize they had just fired themselves. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe if you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. To understand why I destroyed my own empire in a single night, you have to understand the night of the gala. It was the 40th anniversary of Ford Logistics. The Grand Hyatt in Seattle was packed with 500 of the wealthiest people in the Pacific Northwest. There were senators, tech moguls, and competitors who had spent decades trying to buy me out. I stood near the back of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I am 70 years old, and my tolerance for alcohol and hypocrisy has faded with time. The room smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. I watched my son Brandon working the room. He looked the part of a CEO. He was 38, handsome, in a tailored Italian suit that cost more than my first car. He had my chin, but he had his mother's eyes. Beatrice. I felt a pang of old grief in my chest. If Beatrice were here, she would have seen through him in a second. She would have seen that his charm was a veneer, a thin layer of gold paint over cheap plastic. Beside him was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She was radiant in a silver gown that clung to her like liquid mercury. She was laughing at something a board member said, her hand resting possessively on Brandon's arm. Vanessa was smart. I will give her that. She was the one who convinced Brandon that the company needed to modernize. She was the one who suggested we move our headquarters to a glass tower downtown, tripling our overhead. She was the one who whispered in his ear that I was too old, too cautious, too stuck in the past. I had ignored the warning signs because I wanted my son to succeed. I wanted him to be the man I thought I raised. I transferred 51% of the voting shares to him last year as a show of faith. I thought it would make him step up. Instead, it just made him hungry. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Brandon walked up to the microphone, basking in the applause. He looked powerful. He looked like a king. He cleared his throat and smiled that winning smile. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight, we celebrate 40 years of history. But more importantly, we celebrate the future. For too long, Ford Logistics has been held back by outdated methods and conservative thinking. We have been a sleeping giant. But tonight the giant wakes up." I stiffened. Conservative thinking. That was his code word for me. That was his way of mocking the prudence that had kept us profitable through 3 recessions. He continued. "I am proud to announce a complete restructuring of our leadership. As of tonight, we are shedding the dead weight. We are moving towards a fully automated future, leaner, faster, and younger. Effective immediately, I am assuming full control as chairman of the board. My wife Vanessa will be stepping in as chief operating officer to oversee this transition. The crowd clapped politely, but I saw the confused glances. They were looking for me. They expected me to be on stage. They expected a passing of the torch, a handshake, a hug. Instead, Brandon was announcing a coup. He looked directly at me then. Our eyes met across the room. There was no love in his gaze. There was no gratitude. There was only the cold, hard stare of a predator who thinks he has finally killed the alpha. Then my phone buzzed. I read the text. "You are out. Don't come back." The audacity of it took my breath away. He did not even have the courage to tell me to my face. He did it via text message like a coward breaking up with a high school girlfriend. A security guard I did not recognize stepped into my path as I turned to leave. He was young, bulky, and wearing an earpiece. "Mr. Ford," he said, his voice low and firm. "Mr. Brandon has asked that I collect your access badge and your company phone. You are no longer authorized personnel." I looked at the guard. I could have made a scene. I could have shouted that my name was on the building. I could have told him that I signed his paycheck. But I realized in that moment that it did not matter. Brandon had planned this perfectly. He had the board. He had the shares. He had the security. If I fought now, I would just be a sad, angry old man being dragged out of his own party. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the plastic badge. I handed it to the guard. "Keep it," I said. "You are going to need it more than I do." I walked out into the cool Seattle night. The rain was falling in sheets, blurring the lights of the city. I did not call for my driver. I did not want to see anyone. I walked 3 blocks to the parking garage where I kept my personal vehicle, a 10-year-old pickup truck that I used for gardening. It was the only thing I owned that felt real anymore. I sat in the cab listening to the rain hammer against the roof. I looked at the photo of Beatrice taped to the dashboard. We started this company with 1 truck and a kitchen table full of unpaid bills. We ate ramen noodles for 3 years so we could pay our drivers. We built this empire on sweat and blood, not on stock options and corporate takeovers. And now our son had stolen it to buy yachts and penthouses. I drove home. My house is not a mansion. It is a 4-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, the same house Brandon grew up in. He hated it. He called it a relic. He wanted me to sell it and move into a condo, but I kept it because the roses Beatrice planted in the backyard were still blooming. I walked into my study and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat down at my desk. The silence of the house was heavy, oppressive. I felt a deep, aching hollow in my chest. It was not just the loss of the company. It was the loss of my son. The boy I played catch with, the boy I taught to drive, the boy I sat beside in the hospital when he broke his arm. That boy was dead. He had been replaced by this stranger in an Italian suit. I opened my laptop. It hummed to life. I was old, yes. I was conservative, yes. But I was not stupid. Brandon thought he understood the company because he read the balance sheets. He thought he owned Ford Logistics because he held the stock certificates. But he had never bothered to read the fine print of the corporate structure I set up 20 years ago when I first incorporated. He did not understand the difference between the operating entity and the asset holding company. You see, Ford Logistics, the company Brandon now controlled, was essentially a shell. It had employees, it had contracts, and it had a brand name. But it did not own a single truck. It did not own a single warehouse. It did not own the proprietary software that routed our shipments across the globe. All of those assets, the physical spine of the business, were owned by a separate entity called GF Holdings. And GF Holdings was owned 100% by me, Garrison Ford. Ford Logistics leased everything from GF Holdings. The lease agreements were renewed automatically every month, contingent on my remaining as the chairman of the board. It was a failsafe, a poison pill I had inserted into the bylaws decades ago to protect the company from a hostile takeover. I never imagined the hostile force would be my own flesh and blood. I logged into the GF Holdings administrative portal. The interface was simple, stark white text on a black background. I navigated to the active contracts page. There it was. The master lease agreement for the fleet. 500 Class A semi-trucks, 300 delivery vans, the specialized refrigerated units for our pharmaceutical clients. Below that was the lease for the real estate. 4 million square feet of distribution centers across Washington, Oregon, and California. And finally, the software license for the logistics matrix, the brain that told every driver where to go and when. I took a sip of whiskey. The burn was grounding. I was not doing this out of spite, I told myself. I was doing this because a captain does not let mutineers sail his ship into an iceberg. If Brandon wanted to run the company, he needed to learn what the company actually was. He thought it was a bank account. He was about to learn it was a complex machine that required fuel, and I was the one holding the gas can. I clicked on the fleet lease agreement. I selected the option for immediate termination for cause. The cause was simple: removal of the guarantor. I was the personal guarantor for every piece of equipment. Without me, the insurance policies were void. Without insurance, the trucks could not legally be on the road. I typed in my authorization code. The screen flashed green. Termination processed. Kill switch activated. I moved to the facilities lease. I did the same. And then the software. This was the most brutal cut. The software was cloud-based. I had the admin keys. I revoked the license for Ford Logistics. I changed the root passwords. I locked the API access. It took me less than 20 minutes to dismantle an infrastructure that took 40 years to build. I sat back in my chair. The house was quiet. The rain had stopped. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was done. The bridges were burned. There was no going back. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and put on my pajamas. I climbed into the bed that was too big for one person. I thought I would toss and turn, but exhaustion pulled me under like a riptide. I slept dreamlessly. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the curtains. It was a Tuesday. Usually I would be at the office by 6:30 reviewing the overnight manifests. Today I had nowhere to be. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The battery was low, drained by the relentless activity of the screen. 88 missed calls. 40 from Brandon. 25 from Vanessa. 10 from the chief financial officer. 5 from the bank. And 8 from numbers I did not recognize, likely key clients. I unlocked the screen. The text messages were a scrolling wall of panic. Dad, call me. The trucks won't start. The drivers are locked out of the tablets. The warehouse gates won't open. What did you do? Pick up the phone. We are losing $1 million an hour. This isn't funny. Call me right now or I am calling the police. I scrolled through them, reading them like a novel. The tone shifted from confusion to anger, and then to sheer terror. The last message from Brandon had come in 3 minutes ago. It said, "Please." I put the phone down. I did not call him back. I showered and shaved, taking my time. I put on a flannel shirt and jeans. I went down to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I sat at the breakfast nook, looking out at the rose garden. A hummingbird was hovering over the red petals. It was peaceful. At 9 o'clock, I decided to go to my favorite diner for breakfast. It was a small place called Rosie's, about 10 minutes away. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. I did not want to be disturbed. I drove my truck down the familiar streets. As I passed the highway on-ramp, I saw something that made me slow down. On the shoulder of the interstate, there was a line of Ford Logistics trucks parked and silent. They should have been halfway to Portland by now, but they were sitting there dark hulks of metal because the onboard computers had received the kill signal. The drivers were standing by the cabs on their phones looking confused. I felt a twinge of guilt for the drivers. They were good men and women. I would make sure they were taken care of later. But right now they were collateral damage in a war their new CEO had started. I ate my eggs and toast at Rosie's. I read the local paper. There was a small blurb in the business section about the gala written before the chaos of the morning. It praised Brandon as a visionary leader. I folded the paper and left a $20 tip. When I got back to my house, there was a black Porsche Cayenne parked in my driveway. Brandon's car, and behind it, Vanessa's white Mercedes. They were blocking my garage. I parked my truck on the street and walked up the driveway. The front door of my house was wide open. The lockjam was splintered. They had kicked it in. I walked into my own foyer. I could hear them screaming in my study. "He has to be here! Look for the laptop!" Vanessa was shrieking. "I checked the bedroom, he's gone!" Brandon yelled back. I walked to the doorway of the study. They were tearing the room apart. File cabinets were overturned. Papers were scattered across the floor like snow. My desk drawers were pulled out. Brandon was red-faced, sweating his tie undone. Vanessa looked like a banshee, her hair wild, ripping books off the shelves. "Can I help you?" I asked calmly, leaning against the doorframe. They both spun around. Brandon looked at me with eyes that were bloodshot and wild. He charged at me, stopping just inches from my face. "What did you do?" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "Turn it back on. Turn it all back on right now." "I can't do that," I said. "I'm not an employee. I was fired. Remember, you are done here." That was the text. "You are destroying the company," Vanessa yelled, stepping up beside him. "Amazon just called. They are canceling the contract. Do you know what the penalties are? We will be bankrupt by Friday." "That sounds like a problem for the chairman and the COO, I said. "Not for a retired old man." "You own the assets," Brandon shouted. "You have to lease them to us. It is implicit." "It was a month-to-month lease, Brandon," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as stone. "Read the contract. Paragraph 4, Section B. The lessor reserves the right to terminate the agreement immediately upon any change in the executive control of the lessee." "You changed the control. I terminated the lease. It is just business." "You are sick," Vanessa spat. "You are doing this to hurt us. You are doing this because you are jealous." "I am doing this because you stole from me," I said. "You stole the company I built. You thought you could just push me off the cliff and drive away in my car. But you forgot that I own the engine." "Fix it." Brandon grabbed my shirt collar. "Fix it now, or I swear to God." I didn't flinch. I looked at his hand on my flannel shirt. "You broke into my house, Brandon. You destroyed my property, and now you are assaulting me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my other phone, the burner phone I kept for emergencies. I had already dialed 911 before I walked in the door. I pressed send and put it to my ear. "Yes, this is Garrison Ford at 42 Maple Drive. I have 2 intruders in my home. They have broken down my door and are currently threatening me. Yes, I am armed." I wasn't armed, but saying that usually made the police drive faster. Brandon let go of my shirt, his face turning pale. "You called the cops on your own son." "I called the cops on a trespasser," I said. "Get out of my house." "We aren't leaving until you unlock the system," Vanessa said, crossing her arms. "Then you will leave in handcuffs," I said. We stood there in a standoff. The silence was broken only by the sound of sirens in the distance getting louder. Brandon ran to the window. "They're actually coming," he said, panic rising in his voice. "Vanessa, we have to go. We can't be arrested. The press is already camping out at the office." Vanessa looked at me with pure hatred. "You will never see your grandson again," she hissed. "Leo, you will never see him." That was the only blow that landed. Leo was 7. He was innocent in all of this. But I knew that if I gave in now, I would lose everything, including the ability to protect Leo in the future. "Get out," I repeated. They ran past me, knocking my shoulder. I watched them scramble into their expensive cars and peel out of the driveway, just as two police cruisers turned onto the street. I walked out to the porch and waved the officers down. I had a lot of explaining to do and a locksmith to call. The war had started, and I knew their next move would not be physical. It would be legal. But they did not know that I had already made an appointment with Atticus Black, the nastiest, most expensive corporate litigator in Seattle. If they wanted a fight, I would give them a war. The sun had not yet cleared the horizon when the first domino fell. I was sitting at my kitchen island, the smell of freshly ground coffee filling the room, watching the rain streak against the window pane. On the counter, my phone vibrated. It was a short, angry buzz, then another, then a long, continuous stream of vibrations that threatened to rattle the device right off the marble surface. I did not touch it. I knew exactly what was happening across town at the main distribution hub of Ford Logistics. I could see it in my mind as clearly as if I were standing on the dispatch floor. At 5:45 in the morning, the shift supervisors would have arrived. These were men I had hired 20 years ago, men with mortgages and bad backs and an unshakable work ethic. They would have walked into the dispatch center expecting the wall of monitors to be glowing with the blue and green matrix of our global routing system. Instead, they walked into a tomb. The screens were black. The servers housed in a climate-controlled room I had personally designed were silent. When the shift commander tried to log into the main terminal, he didn't get the usual login prompt. He got a single blinking message in stark white text against a void of black. "System license revoked. Contact administrator." I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, bitter, and perfect. The phone buzzed again. It was 6 o'clock. This was the moment the fleet was scheduled to mobilize. 500 Class A semi-trucks parked in precise rows in the massive lot, representing millions of dollars of rolling stock. The drivers, coffee thermoses in hand, would be climbing into the cabs. They would insert their digital keys into the ignition slots. They would expect the roar of diesel engines, the hiss of air brakes, the vibration of power beneath their seats. But this morning there was no roar. There was only silence. The trucks were equipped with advanced telematic systems, a technology I had insisted on upgrading just last year. It allowed for real-time tracking, fuel optimization, and remote diagnostics. It also allowed for a remote kill switch. When I revoked the lease agreement for the equipment, the night before, the central server sent a command code to every single vehicle in the fleet. Immobilize. I imagined the scene. 500 drivers turning keys and getting nothing. No dashboard lights. No starter motor crank. Just dead weight. The confusion would turn to frustration within seconds. Men shouting over radios that weren't connecting to the dispatch tower. Yard marshals running from truck to truck, trying to figure out if it was a battery issue, a fuel issue, a mechanical failure. But it wasn't mechanical. It was existential. The trucks didn't belong to Ford Logistics anymore. They belonged to me, and I had taken my keys back. My phone screen lit up with a name. Jerry, the fleet manager. A good man. He called 3 times in a row. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message as it transcribed on the screen. "Mr. Ford, you need to get down here. It's the apocalypse. Nothing works. The gates are locked electronically. We can't get the trucks out, and even if we could, they won't start. Brandon isn't answering. Please, boss." What do I do? I felt a pang of sympathy for Jerry. He was collateral damage. But war is never clean. At 6:30, the first calls from the clients would start coming in. This was the part that would truly destroy Brandon. We didn't just move boxes. We managed just-in-time supply chains for some of the biggest companies on Earth. Amazon, Walmart, Boeing. When a Ford Logistics truck doesn't move, assembly lines stop. Store shelves go empty. Money incinerates. I pictured Brandon in his penthouse downtown. He was likely hung over from the gala, sleeping next to Vanessa, in sheets that cost more than a Honda Civic. He probably thought his first day as chairman would involve a leisurely brunch and maybe a congratulatory massage. The buzzing of my phone changed tempo. It was no longer the steady rhythm of confusion. It was the frantic staccato beat of panic. Brandon. He called once, twice, 5 times. I watched the screen. I could practically hear his voice cracking. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because he was drowning. Then the text messages started pouring in like water through a breached dam. Dad, the system is down. Dad, the trucks are bricked. Dad, Amazon just called the emergency line. They have perishable cargo sitting on the dock. Dad, fix this. Dad, pick up. I visualized the chaos in the boardroom. Brandon, disheveled, still wearing yesterday's suit pants, screaming at the IT director. Vanessa pacing the floor, her face pale, realizing that her MBA buzzwords couldn't fix a hard-coded lockout. They would be trying to bypass the security. They would be calling expensive consultants. And every single one of them would look at the architecture of the system and tell them the same thing. You don't have the keys. Garrison Ford has the keys. By 7:15, the lawyers for our biggest clients would be drafting breach of contract notices. These weren't small claims. These were performance penalties that accrued by the minute. $50,000 for every hour a shipment was delayed. With 500 trucks sitting idle, the liability was accumulating faster than the national debt. Brandon didn't have the liquidity to cover an hour of this, let alone a day. He had spent the company's cash reserves on the rebranding, the office renovation, and the gala. He was naked, in a blizzard. I finished my coffee and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gray. I saw a police cruiser drive slowly past my house, likely on patrol, unaware that inside a man was systematically dismantling a corporate empire with nothing but silence. At 7:30, my phone rang with a number I recognized. It was the vice president of logistics for Amazon's Northwest division, a man named Sarah. She was tough fare, and she liked me because I never made promises I couldn't keep. I let it ring. If I answered, I would have to lie, or I would have to tell the truth. If I lied, I broke my code. If I told the truth, I exposed myself to a lawsuit before I was ready. Silence was my shield. I checked the status of the bank accounts on my tablet. The operating account for Ford Logistics was already showing red flags. Automatic debits for fuel and insurance were bouncing because I had frozen the credit lines attached to my personal guarantee. The financial hemorrhage was total. Then came the voicemail that made me sit down. It was Brandon again. This time he wasn't screaming. He was whispering, and he sounded like he was crying. Dad, the bank just called. They triggered the key man clause. They said since you are no longer an executive officer, the loans are in default. They are calling in the $50 million note. Immediate repayment. Dad, we don't have $50 million. They are going to seize everything. Vanessa is throwing up in the bathroom. Please, I don't know the passwords. I don't know the codes. You built this trap. You have to let us out. I deleted the message. I did not build a trap, Brandon. I built a fortress. You were the one who decided to lock me out of it without checking who owned the foundation. I stood up and walked to the hallway mirror. I adjusted my flannel shirt. I looked like a retired grandfather preparing for a day of gardening. Nobody looking at me would guess that I was currently holding a billion-dollar supply chain hostage. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite chime of a visitor. It was a heavy, insistent pounding. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. It was Brandon and Vanessa. They looked like refugees from a disaster zone. Brandon's hair was wild, his eyes bloodshot. Vanessa was wearing a trench coat over pajamas, her face smeared with mascara. They were hammering on my front door, shouting my name. I didn't rush. I walked to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened it. The cool morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of their desperation. Brandon almost fell into the foyer. Dad. Thank God. Why didn't you answer? You have to come with us. Right now. You have to come to the office and type in the codes. I blocked the doorway with my body. I am not a small man. 40 years of lifting crates keeps you solid. Good morning, Brandon, I said. Vanessa, you're up early. Stop it, Vanessa shrieked. Her voice was shrill, cracking with hysteria. Stop playing games. Do you know what is happening? We are losing everything. Amazon is pulling the contract. Walmart is threatening to sue us for negligence. That sounds like a very stressful day at the office, I said calmly. I'm glad I'm retired. You aren't retired. Brandon grabbed my arm. His grip was weak, trembling. You are sabotaging us. This is illegal. You can't just turn off a company. I pulled my arm away. I didn't turn off a company, Brandon. I repossessed my property. You fired me, you told me to leave, you said you wanted to take the company in a new direction. Well, you can't take my trucks in that direction. You can't use my software to navigate that direction. And you certainly can't use my money to pay for the fuel. We own the company, Vanessa yelled, stepping forward, her finger pointing in my face. We own 51% of the stock. You own 51% of a management company, I corrected her. A management company that manages assets it does not own. A management company that is currently in breach of its lease agreement for non-payment and unauthorized change of control. Read the contracts, Vanessa. I assume a chief operating officer knows how to read a contract. Brandon looked at me, and for the first time the reality of what he had done truly hit him. His knees actually buckled. He leaned against the doorframe for support. The key man clause, he whispered. The bank called the note. I know, I said. I signed that clause 20 years ago. It states that if Garrison Ford is removed from active management, without the bank's prior written consent, all debts become immediately due and payable. Did you get the bank's consent before you humiliated me at the gala? Brandon stared at the floor. No. Then you are in default. And since the company has no assets to seize because I own them all, the bank will be looking at the personal guarantees. Who signed the personal guarantees for the expansion loan last year? Brandon. His face went the color of ash. I did. And you, Vanessa? I said, looking at her. You co-signed. I remember. You wanted the credit boost so you could buy that vacation home in Aspen. Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal, so I continued, my voice devoid of pity. The bank isn't just going to take the company bank accounts. They are going to take your penthouse. They are going to take your cars. They are going to take your vacation home. They are going to take your personal savings. You are going to be destitute by Friday. Fix it! Vanessa screamed, lunging at me. Her nails were aiming for my face. It was a primal, violent reaction. I caught her wrist before she could touch me. I held it firmly, pushing her back. Get off my property! You have to fix it! Brandon was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Dad, please. I'm your son. You can't let us go bankrupt. You can't let us go to jail. There's fraud involved, Dad. We moved money. If the auditors come, we're dead. I froze. Fraud. I knew they were incompetent. I knew they were greedy. But I didn't know they were criminals. Not yet. What did you say? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. We borrowed against the operating fund, Brandon blubbered, to pay for the gala, to pay for the bonuses. We thought we would pay it back when the new contracts came in. But if the contracts are canceled... Embezzlement, I said. You embezzled corporate funds. It was a loan. Vanessa insisted, rubbing her wrist where I had grabbed her. It's embezzlement if you don't disclose it to the board, and I said. And since I was the chairman until last night and I didn't know about it, that makes it a felony. Get out, I said. I slammed the door in their faces. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My heart was breaking, but my resolve was hardening into diamond. My son wasn't just a failure. He was a thief, and he had tried to steal from the only person who had ever truly loved him. I walked back to the kitchen. My phone was still buzzing. 89 missed calls. 90. The world outside was burning down. But in here it was just me and the silence. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Brandon. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Atticus Black, attorney at law. The Shark of Seattle. Garrison Atticus answered on the first ring. His voice sounded like gravel and expensive scotch. I heard about the gala. I was wondering when you'd call. I need you to file an injunction, I said. And I need you to prepare a foreclosure notice. On who, Atticus asked, though I could hear the smile in his voice. On my son, I said. Burn it all down, Atticus. Every last brick. I heard the tires screech before I heard the engine cut. It was the distinct aggressive sound of high-performance rubber shredding against asphalt, a sound that belonged on a racetrack, not in the driveway of a 70-year-old man who spent his mornings pruning roses. I remained seated in my leather armchair in the study, the one Beatrice had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I did not get up to look out the window. I did not need to. I knew exactly who was outside. I knew because the silence of my phone had finally been broken, not by a ringtone but by the physical proximity of the chaos I had unleashed. The heavy oak front door of my house was locked. The deadbolt was engaged. It was a solid door, built to withstand Seattle storms and the passage of time. But it was not built to withstand the hysterical rage of a man who has just watched his inheritance evaporate into the cloud. The first blow shook the house. It was a dull, heavy thud that rattled the picture frames on the hallway walls. Then came the second, and the third. I heard the wood splintering a sharp, agonizing crack that sounded like a bone breaking. Then came the crash of the door hitting the interior wall, followed by the frantic clicking of high heels on the hardwood floor and the heavy, stomping tread of Italian leather loafers. They were inside. My sanctuary had been breached. For 40 years, this house had been a place of peace. It was where I bandaged skinned knees. It was where I hosted Christmas dinners. It was where I held my wife's hand as she took her last breath. And now it was a crime scene. Garrison. It wasn't Dad anymore. It was Garrison. The name was screamed by Vanessa. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its usual polished socialite veneer. It was raw, guttural, and terrifyingly high-pitched. I stayed in my chair. I took a sip of my coffee, which had gone cold. I placed the mug down on a coaster. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. They burst into the study like a hurricane. Brandon looked like a man who had been hunted for sport. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was soaked through with sweat clinging to his chest. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was standing up in wild tufts. But it was his eyes that held my attention. They were wide-rimmed with red and darting around the room as if looking for a physical exit from a digital prison. Vanessa was right behind him. She was wearing a trench coat over silk pajamas, and she had lost a shoe somewhere in the hallway. She was limping slightly, but she didn't seem to notice. She held her phone in her hand like a weapon, the screen glowing with what I assumed were updates from the legal department she no longer controlled. "Fix it," Brandon wheezed. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Fix it right now." "You broke my door," I said calmly. My voice was low, steady, a stark contrast to the hysteria vibrating off them. "That was solid mahogany. It will cost $3,000 to replace." "I don't care about your door," Brandon screamed, stepping forward and sweeping a stack of papers off my desk. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Do you have any idea what is happening out there? The stock is in freefall. The board is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence. Amazon has triggered the penalty clauses. We are bleeding $5 million an hour. That sounds like a management issue, I said. And as you reminded me last night via text message, I am no longer management. I believe the phrase was, "You are done here." "You are a monster," Vanessa hissed, stepping around Brandon to get closer to me. She smelled of stale champagne and fear. "You planned this. You sat there at the gala drinking your water planning to ruin us. You are a sick, vindictive old man." "I am a landlord," I corrected her. "And you are a tenant who stopped paying rent. It is a simple transaction, Vanessa. You wanted the company, you got the company, but you forgot that a logistics company without trucks is just a list of angry customers." "We own the trucks," Brandon roared. He slammed his fists onto my desk, leaning over me. "It is Ford Logistics. My name is on the side of the cab." "Your name is paint," I said. "Vinyl decals, easily removed. The VIN numbers, however, are registered to GF Holdings. The titles are in my safe deposit box. The insurance policies are in my name. You don't own the trucks, Brandon. You don't own the warehouses. You don't even own the chair you are sitting in at the office. You lease them. And leases have terms." "It was an implied contract," Brandon argued, his voice cracking. "We have been operating this way for 20 years. You can't just change the rules because your feelings got hurt." "I didn't change the rules," I said. "I enforced them. Clause 14, Section C. The lessor reserves the right to terminate all agreements immediately upon a change of control event not approved in writing by the lessor." "You staged a coup, Brandon. That is a change of control. You fired the man who owns the assets. Did you really think I would let you keep using my property to drive me into obsolescence?" Brandon stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. I could see the gears turning in his head, grinding against the rust of his arrogance. He had never read the contracts. He had been too busy picking out the upholstery for the corporate jet. He had assumed that because I was his father, the business was communal property. He had assumed that my love for him was a weakness he could exploit. "Dad," he said, his tone shifting suddenly from aggression to a pathetic, wheedling whine. "Dad, look, we made a mistake. Okay, we were excited. We wanted to make a splash. We didn't mean to cut you out completely. We wanted to modernize. We can fix this. You can come back. We will give you a seat on the board. Emeritus status. We will issue a press release." "Emeritus?" I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. "That means honorary. That means powerless. That means I get a plaque, and you get my life's work." "It is better than nothing," Vanessa interjected. "Which is what you are going to have if you keep this up. If the company goes under, your assets are worthless. Who are you going to lease the trucks to? No one can absorb that much capacity overnight. You are cutting off your nose to spite your face." "I have already received 3 offers this morning." I lied. I hadn't, but they didn't know that. DHL is very interested in a turnkey fleet in the Pacific Northwest. FedEx is always looking for warehouse space. I might liquidate. I might retire for real. I have enough money to live for 1,000 years, Vanessa. Do you? The color drained from her face. She knew the answer. They lived paycheck to paycheck, but on a millionaire's scale. The penthouse, the cars, the private school for Leo, the vacations in St. Bart's, it was all financed by the cash flow I had just severed. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We have debt." "I know," I said. "I saw the credit checks when I co-signed your mortgage. You are leveraged to the hilt." "The bank called the note," Brandon whispered, sinking into the chair opposite me. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "The $50 million credit line. They called it in this morning. They said the key man clause was triggered when I fired you." "Atticus Black drafted that clause," I said. "He is a very thorough lawyer. The bank lent money to Garrison Ford, the founder. They did not lend money to Brandon Ford, the party planner. Without me at the helm, their risk assessment models go into the red. They want their money back before you spend it on rebranding consultants. We don't have $50 million, Brandon said, tears starting to leak from his eyes. We don't even have $5 million. We spent the reserves on the buyback to get the majority shares. Dad, if they foreclose, they take everything. They take the house, they take my personal accounts. I will be on the street. Then you should have thought about that before you tried to kill the king, I said coldly. How can you be so cruel? Vanessa screamed, lurching toward me again. He is your son. He is your flesh and blood. You are supposed to protect him. I did protect him, I shouted back, standing up for the first time. My sudden movement startled them. I am 70, but I am 6'2", and I have spent my life moving heavy things. I protected him his entire life. I gave him a job he wasn't qualified for. I gave him a salary he didn't earn. I gave him shares he didn't pay for. I protected him from the world, and all it did was make him soft, entitled, and treacherous. I am done protecting him. Now I am teaching him. You are destroying his family, Vanessa yelled. What about Leo, Huh? What about your grandson? Are you going to put a 7-year-old on the street? Because that is what you are doing. If we lose the house, Leo loses his home. He loses his school. He loses his friends. Is that the lesson you want to teach, that Grandpa loves his ego more than his family? I felt a sharp pain in my chest at the mention of Leo. Leo was innocent. Leo was the only good thing that had come out of this toxic union. But I knew that if I yielded now, if I let them use Leo as a human shield, I would never be safe. They would use him again and again. They would hold him hostage for the rest of my life. Leo will always have a home, I said, my voice shaking slightly. My home. If you end up on the street, I will petition for custody. I have the means to provide for him. You apparently do not. You will never see him again. Vanessa spat, her face contorted with malice. I will take him away. I will move to the other side of the country. I will tell him his grandfather is a monster who destroyed his parents. He will grow up hating you. I promise you that. Get out, I said. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Get out of my house. We aren't leaving. Brandon stood up, his desperation turning into aggression. We aren't going anywhere until you pick up that laptop and reactivate the servers. I am not asking you, Dad. I am telling you. He moved around the desk. He reached for me. It was a clumsy, frantic grab. He grabbed my flannel shirt, his knuckles white. Do it, he screamed in my face. Do it now. I looked down at his hands on my chest. I remembered holding those hands when they were tiny. I remembered teaching him how to hold a baseball bat. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated college. All of that was gone now, replaced by the sad reality of a man-child throwing a tantrum because his allowance had been cut. You are assaulting me, I said quietly. I don't care. Brandon shook me. Fix it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I dialed 3 numbers. 911, what is your emergency? This is Garrison Ford, I said into the receiver, my eyes locked on my son's terrified face. I am at 42 Maple Drive. I have intruders in my home. They have broken down my front door, and they are currently physically assaulting me. I am an elderly man, and I fear for my safety. Brandon let go of me as if my shirt were on fire. He stumbled back, his face draining of blood. You called the police? He stammered. On me. I called the police on an intruder, I said to the operator. Yes, they are still here. They are refusing to leave. 1 male, 1 female. They are violent. Dad, hang up, Brandon begged, raising his hands in surrender. Hang up. We're going. We're leaving. The police are already dispatched, I said, lowering the phone but not ending the call. Trespassing, breaking and entering, assault on a senior citizen. And judging by the smell of you, Brandon, possibly driving under the influence. Did you drive here or did Vanessa? Brandon looked at Vanessa. She was frozen near the bookshelf, her face a mask of shock. She realized perhaps for the first time that I was not playing by the family rules anymore. I was playing by the rules of war. "We have to go," Vanessa whispered. "Brandon, if the cops come, the press, if there is a mugshot, the investors will pull out completely. It will be the final nail." "Go," I said. "Run. Maybe you can outrun the sirens, but you can't outrun the bank." Brandon looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his face, just a profound, childish confusion. He didn't understand how the world had turned so hard so fast. He didn't understand that the cushion he had landed on his whole life was me, and I had finally stepped aside. "I hate you," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That is the price of the lesson." They turned and ran. I heard their footsteps pounding down the hallway, the sound of them stumbling over the debris of the broken door. I heard the car engines roar to life in the driveway, tires squealing as they reversed onto the street. I walked to the window. I watched them speed away, two desperate people in expensive cars, racing toward a cliff of their own making. A minute later, the police cruiser arrived, lights flashing silently. Two officers approached the porch, guns holstered but hands ready. I walked out to meet them. "Mr. Ford," the older officer asked, looking at the splintered doorframe. "Are you all right?" "I am fine, officer," I said. "They left. It was a family dispute." The officer looked at the damage. "That's some dispute, sir. Do you want to file a report?" I looked at the broken wood. I thought about filing charges. It would be easy. It would be the end of Brandon. A criminal record would bar him from ever holding an executive position in a public company again. It would destroy him completely. "No," I said. "Not today. Just, I need a report number for the insurance, for the door." "Understood," the officer said. "We'll patrol the area, make sure they don't come back." "They won't be back, Sal," I said. "They have bigger problems now." The officers left. I went back inside and found a broom. I started sweeping up the splinters of my front door. The physical labor felt good. It was simple. You make a mess, you clean it up. As I swept, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Brandon. It was Atticus Black. "Garrison," Atticus said. "I just got a call from the bank's legal counsel. They are filing the foreclosure notice on the commercial loans at noon. They are also moving to freeze Brandon's personal assets as part of the guarantee collection. They want to know if you are willing to step in as a guarantor to stop the bleed." I stopped sweeping. I looked at the pile of wood dust on the floor. I thought about Brandon's hand on my collar. I thought about Vanessa threatening to take Leo away. "No," I said. "Let them freeze it. Let them take the penthouse. Let them take the cars. Let them take the jewelry." "That is a scorched earth strategy, Garrison," Atticus warned. "If the bank seizes the collateral, the company is dead. Ford Logistics ceases to exist." "Ford Logistics is already dead, Atticus," I said. "It died last night at the gala. Let the bank strip the carcass. I will be waiting to buy the bones." "The bones?" Atticus asked. "The debt," I said. "When the bank auctions off the bad debt, I want to buy it. I want to be the one holding the paper on my son's life. I want to own his failure." Atticus chuckled, a dry sound, like autumn leaves. "You are a cold man, Garrison Ford." "I am a father," I said, "and my son needs to learn that you cannot build a castle on land you do not own." I hung up. I finished sweeping. Then I went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, and sat down to wait for the inevitable collapse. The silence in the house was absolute, but for the first time in 24 hours, it didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. The process server arrived at my door exactly 2 hours after the police left. He was a small man in a cheap suit who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He handed me a thick envelope, muttered a generic apology, and practically ran back to his car. I did not need to open it to know what it was. It was a summons. Brandon was suing me. I took the envelope into the kitchen and opened it on the counter right next to the pile of sawdust I had swept up from the broken door. The legal language was aggressive and desperate. Emergency motion for injunctive relief. Tortious interference with business relations. Breach of fiduciary duty. Intentional infliction of economic harm. They were throwing every legal stone they could find, hoping one would hit me hard enough to make me flinch. They wanted a judge to order me to unlock the servers and release the trucks immediately. They were claiming that my actions were malicious and that the survival of the company depended on judicial intervention. I picked up my phone and called Atticus Black. "I have it," I said when he answered. "Good," Atticus replied. His voice was calm, the sound of a man who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "The hearing is set for 2 o'clock this afternoon. Judge Sterling. He is a tough old bird. He hates family drama, but he hates contract breaches even more. Wear a tie, Garrison. We are going to court." I put on my best suit. It was a charcoal gray three-piece that I hadn't worn since Beatrice's funeral. I tied my tie with steady hands. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see a defendant. I saw a man who was about to put a wounded animal out of its misery. The courthouse was the imposing building of granite and glass downtown. I walked up the steps, ignoring the few reporters who had already gathered. News of the Ford Logistics collapse had leaked. The business press smelled blood. I saw Brandon and Vanessa standing near the metal detectors. They had cleaned themselves up. Brandon was wearing a fresh suit, though it looked slightly too big for him, as if he had shrunk in the wash. Vanessa was wearing a conservative navy dress and pearls, trying to look like the victim. They were talking to a lawyer I recognized, Preston Thorne. He was a flashy litigator known for high-profile divorces and media stunts. He was expensive, loud, and entirely the wrong choice for a complex corporate contract dispute. They saw me coming. Brandon looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Vanessa glared at me, her jaw set tight. I walked past them without a word. I met Atticus inside the courtroom. He was sitting at the defense table, arranging a stack of files with geometric precision. He looked up and nodded. "Ready to end this?" he asked. I sat down. "I am ready." Judge Sterling entered the room. He was a man in his 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and an expression of permanent skepticism. He looked at the plaintiff's table, then at us. "We are here on an emergency motion," the judge said. "Mr. Thorne, you represent the plaintiffs. Make it quick. I have a full docket." Preston Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. He launched into a theatrical speech about the legacy of Ford Logistics, the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods were at stake, and the cruelty of a father punishing his son. "Your Honor," he boomed, gesturing at me. "Mr. Garrison Ford has maliciously and arbitrarily locked the company out of its own essential assets. He has paralyzed a $50 million enterprise out of spite. We have perishable goods rotting in trucks. We have contracts with Amazon and Walmart that are being breached as we speak. This is not a business dispute. This is sabotage. We are asking the court to compel Mr. Ford to restore access to the software and the fleet immediately to prevent catastrophic financial loss." It was a good speech. If you didn't know the facts, you would think I was a villain. Brandon nodded along, looking appropriately tragic. Vanessa dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. The judge turned to Atticus. "Mr. Black." "Your response," Atticus didn't stand up immediately. He took a sip of water. He adjusted his cuffs. Then he rose, holding a single piece of paper. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Mr. Thorne uses words like sabotage and malice. I prefer words like property rights and contract law." Atticus walked to the center of the room. "The plaintiffs claim they own Ford Logistics. That is true. They own the stock. However, Ford Logistics does not own the trucks. It does not own the warehouses. It does not own the software. It leases them. And the lease agreement which I have here clearly states in Article 14 that the lessor, my client, may terminate the agreement without notice if there is an unauthorized change in control. Atticus handed the paper to the bailiff to give to the judge. Mr. Brandon Ford fired his father via text message. Atticus continued. He removed the founder from the building. That is a change in control. My client simply exercised his contractual right to protect his assets from an inexperienced management team that had just decapitated the company's leadership. This is a repossession, Your Honor. It is no different than Hertz taking back a rental car when the driver stops paying. Preston Thorne jumped up. Objection. This is a bad faith argument. The assets were always intended to be part of the company operations. It was an implied partnership. It was a written contract, Atticus countered sharply, signed by Brandon Ford himself 3 years ago. If he didn't read it, that is negligence, not an implied partnership. The judge looked over his glasses at Brandon. Mr. Ford, did you sign this lease agreement? Brandon stood up, his legs shaking. I sign a lot of paperwork, Your Honor. It was just a formality. My dad, Garrison, he always said the company was mine eventually. Eventually is not today, the judge said. He turned back to Thorne. Counsel, you are asking me to force a private citizen to lend his personal property to a company that just fired him. That is a high bar. But the economic damage, Thorne argued. The innocent employees. The economic damage was caused by the plaintiff's decision to trigger a crisis they were unprepared to manage, Atticus said. And speaking of economic damage, Your Honor, there is another matter that makes this request for equitable relief impossible. Atticus walked back to our table and picked up a thick black binder. This was it, the weapon we had been saving. Equity demands clean hands, Your Honor, Atticus said. A plaintiff cannot ask the court for help if they have come to the court with unclean hands. And the hands of Mr. Brandon Ford and Mrs. Vanessa Ford are filthy. Vanessa stiffened in her seat. Brandon looked confused. Thorne looked wary. What are you talking about? Thorne asked. Atticus opened the binder. During the brief period between the firing of my client and this hearing, we conducted a forensic audit of the shared accounts between Ford Logistics and the operating fund to which my client had access as the guarantor. Atticus pulled out a spreadsheet with red tabs. We discovered a series of irregularities, Atticus said. Over the past 18 months, $2 million was transferred from the company's capital improvement fund into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands under the name V&B Consultants. The room went deadly silent. I looked at Brandon. His face had gone from pale to a sickly gray. Vanessa stopped dabbing her eyes and gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. These funds were marked in the company ledger as marketing expenses and software development fees, Atticus continued. However, we traced the disbursements from V&B Consultants. They were not used for software. Atticus pulled out a glossy photograph. It showed a 40-foot yacht docked in a marina in Miami. This is the Sea Spirit, Atticus said. Purchased 6 months ago for $1.2 million. The title is held by V&B Consultants. The primary beneficiaries of that entity are Brandon and Vanessa Ford. He pulled out another photo. This one was a receipt from a high-end jeweler in Seattle. And this is a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet and a Patek Philippe watch totaling $400,000, paid for by a wire transfer from V&B Consultants. Atticus dropped the photos on the plaintiff's table. They landed with a soft slap that sounded like a gunshot. Your Honor, Atticus said, his voice turning hard. This is not a business dispute. This is grand larceny. This is embezzlement. The plaintiffs drained the company's reserves to buy toys, while the business was operating on credit guarantees provided by my client. They are insolvent not because my client locked the doors, but because they looted the vault. So on. Preston Thorne looked at his clients. He looked at the photos. He looked at the spreadsheet. He realized in that moment that his career was flashing before his eyes. He stepped away from Brandon and Vanessa, physically creating distance between himself and the radioactive fallout. "I didn't know about this," Thorne whispered to the judge. "I was not informed." Brandon stood up. "It wasn't stealing," he shouted, his voice cracking. "It was a loan. We were going to pay it back. The company was making money. We deserved a bonus. We worked hard." Vanessa grabbed his arm, trying to pull him down. "Shut up, Brandon." "Shut up!" Judge Sterling slammed his gavel down. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. "Sit down," the judge roared. Brandon collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "Mr. Black," the judge said, his voice icy. "Are these documents authenticated?" "They are, Your Honor," Atticus said. "Bank records, wire transfers, and title deeds. We are prepared to submit them to the district attorney's office immediately." The judge looked at Brandon and Vanessa with an expression of pure disgust. "Motion for injunctive relief is denied," the judge ruled. "Mr. Ford, you have every right to protect your assets from what appears to be massive criminal fraud." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Secure this courtroom. No one leaves until the sheriff's deputies arrive. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate investigation into corporate embezzlement and fraud. Mr. Thorne, I suggest you advise your clients of their Fifth Amendment rights, because they are going to need them." Vanessa let out a wail that wasn't human. She looked at me across the aisle. Her eyes were filled with hate, but underneath the hate was a terrifying realization. The game was over. The house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had caught fire. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at Brandon. He was sobbing quietly, his shoulders shaking. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. Atticus closed his briefcase. "That went well," he murmured. We walked toward the exit. As I passed the plaintiff's table, Vanessa lunged. She didn't try to hit me this time. She grabbed my sleeve. "Garrison, please," she begged, her voice a frantic whisper. "Leo. Think of Leo. If we go to jail, what happens to him?" I pulled my arm away, gently but firmly. "Leo will be fine," I said. "I will make sure of that." "But you should have thought about Leo before you bought a yacht with stolen money." I walked out of the courtroom. The reporters were waiting in the hall, their cameras flashing. They shouted questions. "Mr. Ford, is it true the company is bankrupt? Mr. Ford, are you pressing charges against your son, Mr. Ford? What happens next?" I ignored them. I walked down the marble steps of the courthouse and out into the afternoon sun. The air smelled of exhaust and city rain. I took a deep breath. It hurt. It hurt to breathe because every breath was a reminder that my son was a criminal. But it was a clean pain. It was the pain of a surgeon who has just cut out a tumor. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from the bank. The foreclosure process on the Ford Logistics headquarters had officially begun. The $50 million domino had fallen. I got into my truck. I sat there for a moment watching the courthouse doors. 10 minutes later, I saw them. Brandon and Vanessa, flanked by deputies, being led out a side door toward a waiting police van. They weren't in handcuffs yet, but they were in custody for questioning. Brandon looked small. He looked like a child who had lost his parents in a crowd. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I had one more stop to make. I had to go to the school. I had to pick up Leo, because his parents weren't going to show up today, and someone had to tell him that his world had changed and that Grandpa was going to be there to catch him. But the war wasn't over. The company was dead, yes, but the debt remained. And the debt was the key to the final lesson. I drove toward the bank. I had a meeting with the vice president of commercial lending. I wasn't going to pay off the loan. I was going to buy it. I was going to become my son's creditor. I was going to own his failure dollar for dollar. The ink on Judge Sterling's court order was barely dry when the first domino of the financial apocalypse toppled over. I was sitting in the quiet, air-conditioned office of the senior vice president of commercial lending at First Pacific Bank, a man named Jonathan, who I had played golf with for 15 years. On the desk between us sat a single sheet of paper. It was the formal notice of default. Jonathan looked at me, his face pale. He pushed the paper across the mahogany toward me, not as a threat, but as a courtesy. "Garrison," he said, his voice hushed. "I have no choice. The legal department is screaming. The moment the judge ruled that you were no longer in control of the assets, the risk profile of Ford Logistics went from prime to toxic in a nanosecond. We are triggering the acceleration clause." I picked up the paper. It was brutal in its simplicity. Demand for immediate payment in full. Principal amount $48,700,000, plus interest, plus penalties. Due within 24 hours. "Do it," I said. Jonathan typed a command into his terminal. At that exact moment, across town in the glass tower that Brandon had leased for 3 times the market rate, the fax machines and email inboxes of the Ford Logistics Finance Department lit up with the digital equivalent of a nuclear strike. I checked the stock ticker on my phone. Ford Logistics was a small-cap public company listed on the secondary exchange. At the start of the gala last night, the stock was trading at $12 a share. When the market opened this morning, rumors of the lockout had pushed it down to 8. But now, as the news of the judge's ruling and the DA's investigation hit the wires, the line on the graph didn't just dip. It fell off a cliff. $7, 6, 4. The trading algorithms had smelled blood. The short sellers were swarming like piranhas. By the time I left the bank, 40 years of equity value had been wiped out. The company was technically worthless. I drove to the school to ensure Leo was safe, leaving him with my trusted housekeeper, Maria, who had been with us since he was born. Then I drove to the Ford Logistics headquarters. I didn't go in. I parked my truck across the street in the shadow of a parking garage, and I watched. I watched the employees leaving in droves carrying boxes of personal belongings. They knew. The rats always know when the ship is sinking. I felt a heavy weight in my gut for them. They were good people. They would be rehired, I promised myself. But first, the captain had to go down with the ship. Around 4 o'clock, a black sedan screeched up to the front entrance. Brandon got out. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours. His suit was rumpled, his tie missing. He had been released from police custody pending further investigation into the embezzlement charges, likely on a massive bail bond posted by Vanessa's parents. He stormed into the building past the weeping receptionists, believing he was still the king, returning to his castle. He didn't know the castle had already been sold for scrap. I pulled out my tablet and accessed the boardroom security camera feed. I still had the admin codes for the internal surveillance system. It was a separate network from the logistics software, and in their arrogance, they had never bothered to change the passwords. I watched the screen. The boardroom was full. The board of directors, 7 men and women who had clapped for Brandon the night before, were sitting around the long oval table. They looked terrified. They were looking at their phones, watching the stock price hit 0. Brandon burst into the room. "Why is everyone just sitting there?" he screamed. The audio feed was crisp. "Get on the phones. Call Amazon. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. Tell them my father is senile. We need to issue a press release." The room was silent. No one moved. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne, the lead independent director. He was a venture capitalist with ice water in his veins. He stood up slowly. "Sit down, Brandon," Marcus said. "I don't have time to sit down," Brandon yelled, pacing frantically. "We have to stop the bleeding. Vanessa is working on a bridge loan from her contacts in Hong Kong. We can fix this. I just need 48 hours. You don't have 48 minutes, Marcus said. We just received the notice from First Pacific. The debt has been called. We are insolvent. My dad will pay it, Brandon said, his voice trembling with a manic desperation. He's just teaching me a lesson. He won't let the company actually die. He built it. He loves it too much. He loves the company, Marcus said. He clearly does not love what you turned it into. And frankly, neither do we. What is that supposed to mean? Brandon snapped. It means we know about the yacht, Brandon, a female board member said from the end of the table. She threw a copy of the court transcript onto the polished wood. We know about the Cayman Islands accounts. We know about the $2 million. Brandon froze. That was authorized. It was a strategic reserve allocation. It was theft, Marcus said. And because of your strategic allocation, we are all potentially liable for failure of oversight. Do you know what happens when the SEC gets wind of this? We aren't just looking at bankruptcy. We are looking at federal indictments. I am the chairman, Brandon shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I hold the voting shares. You can't talk to me like this. You hold 51% of the shares, Marcus corrected him. But 40% of those shares are Class B restricted stock contingent on performance milestones that you have spectacularly failed to meet in the last 24 hours. Read the bylaws your father wrote, Brandon. The moral turpitude clause. Any executive under criminal investigation for financial fraud automatically forfeits their voting rights. Brandon stepped back, shaking his head. No, that's not true. It is true, Marcus said. We voted 10 minutes ago. With your voting rights suspended, the remaining board voted unanimously. Marcus slid a single sheet of paper down the long table. It stopped right at the edge, directly in front of Brandon. You are fired, Brandon, Marcus said. Effective immediately. You are removed as CEO and chairman. You are stripped of all executive powers. Security is on the way up to escort you from the building. Brandon looked at the paper. He looked at the faces of the people who had toasted him with champagne less than 24 hours ago. He saw no sympathy. He saw only self-preservation. You can't do this, Brandon whispered. I am Ford Logistics. Ford Logistics is a corpse, Marcus said brutally. And you are the one who held the knife. We are just trying to salvage enough scraps to pay our own legal fees. The doors to the boardroom opened. 2 security guards entered. They weren't the young guys Brandon had hired. They were the old guard men I had known for years, men Brandon had fired just yesterday. I had made a call to the security contractor. They were happy to reinstate the senior team. Mr. Ford, the head guard said, his voice devoid of emotion. We need your badge. Brandon looked at the guard. He looked at the board. He looked at the window where the Seattle rain was starting to fall again. He realized finally that there was no bottom to this fall. He wasn't just losing his job. He was losing his identity. My dad, Brandon choked out. Call my dad. He'll vouch for me. Your father is the one who sent us the evidence regarding the embezzlement, Marcus said. He isn't going to save you, Brandon. He is the one pressing the charges. Brandon made a sound like a suffocating animal. He reached for his chest as if he were having a heart attack, but it was just the crushing weight of reality. He slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Get him out of here, Marcus ordered. The guards approached. They didn't rough him up. They just took him by the arms, lifted him out of the chair, and walked him to the door. He didn't fight. He dragged his feet, a dead man walking. As they hauled him out into the hallway, his phone fell from his pocket and slid across the floor. No one picked it up. On the screen, visible even through the security camera resolution, a notification popped up. It was a margin call from his personal brokerage account. His personal assets were being liquidated to cover the leveraged positions he had taken on the company stock. He was broke. I closed the laptop. I sat in my truck, watching the front doors of the building. 5 minutes later, Brandon stumbled out onto the sidewalk. He didn't have a box of belongings. He didn't have a coat. He just stood there in the rain, looking up at the glass tower that bore his name, a name he had disgraced. He reached into his pocket for his car keys, then stopped. He remembered. The bank had already sent the tow trucks for the company cars. His Porsche was gone. He stood on the curb, shivering. He looked left. He looked right. He had no friends. He had no wife. Vanessa was likely already packing her bags or talking to a divorce lawyer to save herself. He had no father. I started the engine of my truck. I could have driven over there. I could have rolled down the window and offered him a ride. I could have taken him home, given him a hot meal, and told him it would be okay. That is what a father does, isn't it? A father forgives, but a father also teaches, and some lessons only stick when you are wet, cold, and completely alone. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving my son standing in the rain, staring at the ruins of the empire he thought he deserved. I had a meeting with the bankruptcy trustee. I had to set up the shell company. Phoenix Holdings was about to make its first acquisition. I was going to buy my own company back for pennies on the dollar, and I needed to make sure the paperwork was perfect. Because when I offered Brandon a job next week, I needed to be sure he understood exactly who signed the checks. The rain had turned into a relentless, freezing drizzle that coated Seattle in a layer of gray despair. I was sitting on my porch, a blanket over my legs, watching the streetlights flicker. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional passing car. My phone had finally stopped buzzing. The 88 missed calls had turned into a digital graveyard of unanswered pleas. Brandon had gone silent. I assumed he was somewhere drowning his sorrows in cheap liquor now that his credit cards were declined at the clubs. But the silence of the night was deceptive. In the world of corporate collapses, the night is when the real predators come out to feed. At 10:30, a solitary pair of headlights cut through the gloom. It wasn't a sports car. It was a rideshare sedan, a Toyota Camry that looked like it had seen better days. It pulled up to the curb, idling for a moment, before the back door opened. Vanessa stepped out. She wasn't wearing the silk trench coat or the designer heels she had worn during the invasion of my home just yesterday. She was wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She carried a large duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She looked around nervously, scanning the street for police or reporters before walking up my driveway. She didn't stomp this time. She crept. I didn't move from my chair. I watched her approach. She saw me sitting in the shadows of the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps. The motion sensor light flicked on, bathing her in a harsh, unforgiving white glare. It highlighted the dark circles under her eyes and the tremor in her hands. "Garrison," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, stripped of its usual haughty cadence. "Can I come up? It is freezing." I stayed silent for a long moment. I could have told her to leave. I could have called the police again. But curiosity is a powerful thing. I wanted to see what a rat looks like when it is trying to negotiate with the trap. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the wicker chair on the other side of the porch table. She walked up the steps and sat down, dropping the heavy duffel bag at her feet with a metallic clank. She pulled her sleeves down over her hands, shivering. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a set of keys and placed them on the table. They were the keys to the penthouse. "I don't need those," I said. "The bank owns that apartment now." "I know," she said. "But I thought you should have them, in case there is anything of Brandon's you want to save before the locks are changed tomorrow." She was starting with a peace offering. It was a classic negotiation tactic. Give something worthless to establish a rapport. "Where is my son?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, looking down at her hands. "He didn't come home last night. After the security guards threw him out, he just vanished. I think he is at a motel, or maybe sleeping in his car." He wouldn't answer my calls. You are his wife, I said. You didn't go look for him. He is a grown man, Garrison, she snapped, a flash of her old fire appearing before she quickly tamped it down. And honestly, he is dangerous right now. He is unstable. You saw him yesterday. He attacked you. He grabbed my collar, I corrected. He was desperate. He is weak, Vanessa said. The venom in her voice was sudden and shocking. He has always been weak. That is why we are in this mess. I told him not to fire you. I told him it was too soon. I told him we needed to wait until the quarterly reports were filed. But he wouldn't listen. He was so obsessed with proving he was the big man. He drove us off a cliff, Garrison. I was just a passenger. I looked at her. The narrative was shifting. She was rewriting history in real time, casting herself as the prudent voice of reason and Brandon as the reckless driver. It was a survival strategy I had seen 100 times in boardrooms, but seeing it played out in my family was nauseating. You were the chief operating officer, I reminded her. You signed the checks. You signed the lease agreements. He forced me, she said, her eyes filling with tears that looked practiced. He pressured me. He said if I didn't support him, he would divorce me and leave me with nothing. You know how he is with money. He is obsessed with status. He made me buy the yacht. He made me lease the cars. I wanted to save Garrison. I wanted to build a nest egg for Leo, but Brandon, he spent it faster than we could make it. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled back. I am a victim here too, she whispered. I have lost my home. I have lost my reputation. I am facing criminal charges because of his schemes. I came here tonight to ask for mercy. Not for him, but for me. And for Leo. Leo, I said. Where is he? He is with the nanny, she said quickly. At her apartment. He is safe, but I can't pay her, and I have nowhere to take him. Garrison, I need help. I need to get out of the city. The press is hounding me. The district attorney has frozen my accounts. I need a loan. Just enough to get set up somewhere else. Somewhere safe for Leo. A loan, I repeated. You want money? I want a chance to start over, she pleaded. If you give me $50,000, cash, I will sign full custody of Leo over to you. I will disappear. You will never see me again. I will leave Brandon. I will leave Seattle. You can raise Leo the way you want. You can save him from this mess. I stared at her. She was selling her son. She was bartering her own child for a getaway fund. It was the lowest thing I had ever witnessed. But it was also revealing. It showed me exactly who she was, and it meant I didn't have to hold back the last piece of evidence I had stored on my tablet. I reached under the blanket and pulled out my iPad. I placed it on the table between us. You say Brandon forced you, I said. You say he was the mastermind. You say you were the prudent one. Yes, she nodded eagerly. He is a narcissist, Garrison. He controlled everything. I tapped the screen. I opened the video file labeled Penthouse Kitchen, August 14th. You didn't know I installed security cameras in the penthouse when I co-signed the mortgage, did you? I asked. It was a condition of the insurance policy for the art collection you insisted on buying. Cloud storage. Accessible only by the guarantor. Me. Vanessa went rigid, her eyes fixed on the screen. The video played. It was grainy night vision footage from the kitchen of their luxury apartment. Brandon was sitting at the island, his head in his hands, looking terrified. Vanessa was standing over him holding a pen and a stack of documents. I turned up the volume. The audio was crystal clear. I can't sign this, Ness. Brandon's voice on the video was shaking. It's fraud. If Dad finds out we are moving capital reserves to a shell company, it's prison time. Your dad is an old fool. Vanessa's voice on the video was sharp, commanding. He won't check the ledger until the end of the fiscal year. By then, we will have flipped the real estate deal in Miami and paid it back. Sign the damn paper, Brandon. Do you want the yacht or not? Do you want to be a big shot? Or do you want to live on an allowance forever? But the signatures, Brandon stammered. This requires 2 signatures, mine and the chairman's. Then forge it, Vanessa screamed in the video. She slammed her hand on the counter. Practice his signature. You've seen it 1,000,000 times. Just do it. Stop being a coward. I am building an empire here and you are crying about paperwork. Sign it, or I take Leo and I leave you tonight. Brandon picked up the pen. He signed. I paused the video. The freeze frame showed Vanessa smiling a cold, predatory smile as she took the papers from his hand. I looked up at the real Vanessa sitting across from me. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face had gone completely slack, drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. He didn't force you, I said softly. You broke him. You took his insecurities, his desire to please me, and you weaponized them. You are the architect, Vanessa. You are the one who set up the shell company. You are the one who ordered the forgery. Brandon is just a fool. You are a criminal. She stood up slowly, backing away from the table. You have had that this whole time. I found it last night, I said. When I started digging, I sent a copy to the district attorney an hour ago, along with the wire transfer records linking the shell company to your personal offshore accounts. My accounts, she whispered. The ones in the Caymans, I said. The ones you didn't tell Brandon about. You weren't just stealing from the company, Vanessa. You were stealing from your husband. You were preparing a golden parachute for yourself while he took the fall. She looked at the duffel bag at her feet. Then she looked at the street. She realized the walls were closing in. The police weren't just looking for Brandon. They were looking for the mastermind. I have to go, she said, her voice trembling. What about Leo? I asked. You offered to sell him to me. Keep him, she spat, grabbing her bag. He is just like his father. Weak. He slows me down. You are abandoning your son. I am surviving, she screamed. I am not going to prison for that idiot. I am leaving. Don't follow me. She ran down the steps. She didn't look back. She sprinted toward the waiting car, threw her bag in the back seat, and jumped in. The car sped off into the rain, disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence return. She was gone. She had chosen money over family, freedom over duty. She was a coward to the bone. But she had left something behind. The truth. And a vacancy. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Maria, the nanny. It was late, but she answered on the first ring. Mr. Ford? She asked, sounding frightened. Is everything okay, Mrs. Ford? Vanessa? She called me an hour ago. She said she was coming to get Leo, but then she texted and said she wasn't coming back. She said I should call you. She isn't coming back, Maria. I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. She is gone. What about Mr. Brandon? He is gone too for now, I said. Is Leo awake? No, sir. He cried himself to sleep. He was waiting for them. I am coming to get him, I said. Pack his things, everything he needs. He is coming to live with me. Yes, sir, Maria said, relief flooding her voice. I will have him ready. I hung up. I stood up and walked to my truck. My joints ached. I felt every minute of my 70 years. But as I started the engine, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The weeds had been pulled. The parasites had been removed. The garden was destroyed, yes. But the soil was still there. And in the soil, there was a single seed left. Leo. I drove through the rain to save my grandson. I wasn't going to be just a grandfather anymore. I was going to be the father he never had. And this time I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. I wasn't going to protect him from the world. I was going to teach him how to build it. But first, I had to deal with the wreckage of his father. Brandon was out there somewhere alone, broke and broken, and I owned his debt. The final lesson was about to begin. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in the efficiency of the American banking system when it decides to devour its prey. I did not have to lift a finger. I simply sat back and watched the machinery of foreclosure grind my son's life into dust. It started the morning after Vanessa fled. Brandon had attempted to return to the penthouse, likely to grab clothes or perhaps to find the wife who had already abandoned him. He didn't make it past the lobby. The concierge, a man Brandon had tipped lavishly for years using company funds, stopped him at the elevators. He didn't smile. He didn't open the door. He simply handed Brandon a cardboard box containing a few personal items the building management had cleared out of the apartment. The locks had been digitally rekeyed at 9 in the morning. The elevator access code had been wiped. The bank had moved with predatory speed, filing an emergency writ of possession based on the default of the jumbo mortgage I had refused to guarantee any longer. I heard about the scene from Atticus. Brandon had screamed. He had threatened to sue. He had thrown the box across the marble floor of the lobby, scattering his expensive watches and designer sunglasses for the cleaning staff to sweep up. Then he had tried to go to the garage to get his car. That was the second blow. The garage access was denied, but he managed to sneak in behind a resident. He ran to his parking spot. Spot number 1, right next to the elevator. It was empty. The spot next to it, where Vanessa's white Mercedes usually sat, was also empty. The repo men had come in the night. They are the ghosts of the financial world. They have keys to everything, and they do not ask for permission. They had taken the Porsche Cayenne. They had taken the Mercedes. They had even taken the vintage Mustang Brandon had bought for weekend drives, a car he didn't know how to fix, and rarely drove because he was afraid of scratching the paint. Brandon was left standing in the concrete silence of the parking structure, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a cell phone that was rapidly running out of battery. He walked out of the garage and onto the rainy streets of Seattle. He had no wallet. It was in the penthouse. He had no cash. He had relied entirely on Apple Pay and credit cards, all of which were now declining transactions for a cup of coffee. He was a ghost. He was a man who existed only as a reflection of his bank account, and the mirror had shattered. For the first night he wandered. He went to the private club where he held a platinum membership. They stopped him at the door. His membership had been revoked due to the scandal. He went to the bar where his drinking buddies hung out. They saw him coming and turned their backs. They had seen the news. They knew he was radioactive. In the world of high finance and social climbing, failure is a contagious disease, and Brandon was patient zero. He ended up walking 4 miles in the rain to a storage facility on the outskirts of the industrial district. It was a unit he had rented years ago to store old furniture from his college days that Vanessa refused to have in the penthouse. Inside that unit, covered in a dusty tarp, was the only asset the bank had missed. It was a 2008 Ford Taurus. It was a fleet sedan retired from service 10 years ago. It had 200,000 miles on the odometer, a dent in the rear bumper, and stains on the upholstery. I had given it to him when he graduated high school. He had hated it. He had hidden it away the moment he got his first executive bonus, ashamed to be seen in it. Now it was his lifeboat. He started the engine. It coughed and sputtered, complaining about the years of neglect, but it turned over. It had half a tank of gas. That was his net worth. Half a tank of unleaded. He drove the Taurus out of the storage unit. He didn't have anywhere to go. He drove to a park near the water and parked in the shadows. He reclined the seat. He tried to sleep. But hunger is a sharp companion. He hadn't eaten in 24 hours. He searched the glove box. He found $3 in quarters and a stale granola bar that had likely expired during the Obama administration. He ate the bar. It tasted like cardboard and dust. He counted the quarters. He had enough for a fast food burger, but he was afraid to spend it. He was afraid because for the first time in his 38 years, he didn't know where the next dollar was coming from. I watched him from a distance. I had a GPS tracker on the fleet vehicle. I knew exactly where he was. I drove past the park in my truck. I saw the silhouette of my son curled up in the driver's seat of that rusted sedan. He looked like a child hiding from a thunderstorm. I wanted to go to him. The instinct was physical, a pull in my gut. But I stayed in my lane. I kept driving. If I saved him now, I would be saving him from the cure. The next day was a lesson in survival skills he did not possess. Brandon woke up stiff and cold. The car windows were fogged with condensation. He needed to use a bathroom. He drove to a gas station, but the attendant told him the restroom was for customers only. He had to buy something. He spent $1 on a bottle of water just to use a toilet that hadn't been cleaned in a week. He came out and realized he had a flat tire. He stared at the wheel. He kicked it. He screamed at the sky. But the tire remained flat. I watched from the feed of the gas station security camera, which I had accessed through a favor from an old client who owned the franchise. Brandon opened the trunk. He found the jack and the spare tire. He took them out and threw them on the ground. Then he stood there. He didn't know how to change a tire. He had never changed a tire in his life. If he had a flat, he called roadside assistance. He called me. He called an assistant. But there was no one to call. He was a 38-year-old man, a former CEO, a master of the universe, and he was defeated by 4 lug nuts. He spent an hour wrestling with the jack, putting it in the wrong place, almost crushing his hand. He stripped the threads on one of the nuts because he was turning it the wrong way. He wept openly, tears mixing with the grease on his face. Finally, a truck driver who was filling up his rig took pity on him. The trucker, a man named Miller, who used to work for me before Brandon fired him in a cost-cutting measure last year, walked over. "Need a hand, son?" Miller asked. Brandon didn't recognize him. He just nodded, humiliated. Miller changed the tire in 5 minutes. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Brandon. "You look familiar," Miller said. "I am nobody," Brandon whispered. Miller looked at him closely. "Yeah. You used to be the boss. You fired me 2 days before Christmas. Said the company needed to be lean." Brandon shrank back against the dirty car. Miller spat on the ground dangerously close to Brandon's shoe. "Karma is a wheel," Miller said, "and it looks like yours just went flat." Miller walked away. Brandon got back into the car and drove off on the donut spare, the car listing to the side, a perfect metaphor for his life. He spent the rest of the day trying to pawn his watch. It was a Rolex he had bought with company funds. He went to a pawn shop on 4th Avenue. The broker looked at the watch, then looked at Brandon. "I can't take this," the broker said. "Why not?" "It is worth $20,000, Brandon argued. "It is listed as stolen property," the broker said. "The police sent out a bulletin this morning. All assets purchased by V&B consultants are flagged as evidence in an embezzlement investigation. If I take this, I go to jail. And if you don't get out of my shop in 10 seconds, I am calling the cops." Brandon ran. He was a fugitive in his own city. He realized then that he didn't own anything. His clothes, his watch, his shoes, they were all fruits of a poisoned tree. He was walking around in evidence. Night fell again. The temperature dropped. Brandon parked the car in an alley behind a grocery store. He watched people walking out with bags of food. He saw a rotisserie chicken. He salivated like a dog. He had no skills. He couldn't cook. He couldn't fix things. He couldn't negotiate. He couldn't code. He couldn't drive a truck. His entire skill set was being the son of Garrison Ford, and that position had been eliminated. He tried to sleep, but the cold was biting. He turned on the car to run the heater, but the gas needle was hovering on empty. He turned it off. He curled into a ball in the back seat, covering himself with a floor mat for warmth. He thought about the gala. He thought about the applause. He thought about Vanessa telling him he was a king. It all seemed like a hallucination now. The only reality was the smell of old upholstery and the gnawing pain in his stomach. He realized he was going to die. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He couldn't survive this. He was soft. He was a domesticated animal released into the wild. He would starve, or he would freeze, or he would be eaten. At dawn on the third day, he broke. He didn't call me. He didn't text. He started the car and used the last cup of gasoline to drive to my house. I was in the kitchen making breakfast for Leo. Leo was sitting at the table eating pancakes. He looked happy. He felt safe. We didn't talk about his parents. He hadn't asked. He knew in the way children know things that they were gone and that it was for the best. I saw the beat-up Ford Taurus pull up to the curb. It stalled out right in front of the driveway. It had run out of gas exactly at the finish line. Brandon got out. He looked like a specter. His clothes were filthy. He had a 3-day beard. He smelled of sweat and gasoline. He walked up the driveway, his head hanging low. He didn't stomp. He didn't run. He walked with the heavy shuffling gait of a man carrying the weight of the world. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He didn't come up. He knew he wasn't welcome. He knelt down on the concrete. It was raining again, a light cleansing drizzle. He let the rain soak him. I walked out onto the porch. I closed the door behind me so Leo wouldn't see. Brandon looked up at me. His eyes were hollow. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. There was nothing left but a terrified boy. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "Dad," he croaked. His voice was a ruin. I looked at him. I didn't offer him a hand. I didn't offer him money. "I am hungry," he whispered. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in 20 years. I went back inside. I grabbed a plate of pancakes and a glass of milk. I brought them out and set them on the porch railing. "Eat," I said. He ate with his hands. He ate like a starving man. He drank the milk in one gulp. When he was done, he wiped his mouth with his dirty sleeve. He looked at me and then he started to cry. It wasn't the manipulative crying he had done before. This was deep, ugly sobbing. It was the sound of a soul breaking. "I am sorry," he choked out. "I am so sorry. I ruined everything. I am useless. I am nothing without you." I let him cry. I let the rain wash over him. "I don't want the money," he said, looking down at the wet concrete. "I don't care about the company. I don't want to go to jail, Dad. Please. I am scared. I am so scared." He was asking for the one thing I could give him. Not a handout. Not a bailout. A lifeline. I looked at my son. He was broken. He was at rock bottom. And that was exactly where I needed him to be. Because you can't build a foundation on a swamp. You have to drain it first. I walked down the steps. I stood over him. "I can keep you out of prison," I said. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes like a dying candle. "How I bought the debt," I said. "I bought the notes from the bank this morning. I own your loans. I own your fraud. I am the victim, the creditor, and the prosecutor. I can drop the charges." "Thank you," he wept, grabbing my shoe. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you." But I said, pulling my foot away, "There is a condition." "Anything," he said. "I will do anything." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a contract for a board seat. It was a job offer. I handed it to him. "Phoenix Holdings has acquired the assets of Ford Logistics," I said. "We are restarting operations on Monday. We are hiring." Brandon opened the envelope. He read the paper. His eyes widened. Dock worker, he read. Level 1 minimum wage. It is the only position available for someone with your skill set, I said. You start at 4 a.m. on Monday. You will load trucks. You will sweep floors. You will listen to supervisors who used to work for you. You will wear a uniform with your name on it, but no title. You will work 10-hour shifts. And every Friday you will receive a paycheck for exactly what you earned. Not a penny more. He stared at the paper. It was a demotion from emperor to peasant. It was a humiliation. If you miss a shift, I said, I file the charges. If you complain, I file the charges. If you steal so much as a paperclip, I file the charges. You have a choice, Brandon. You can be a CEO in a prison cell, or you can be a man on a loading dock. Choose. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. He looked at the house where his son was eating pancakes. He swallowed his pride. It was a hard swallow, like swallowing glass. I'll take it, he whispered. Good, I said. I pointed to the garage. There is a cot in the workshop. You can sleep there. There is a shower in the laundry room. Clean yourself up. You smell like failure. I turned and walked back into the house. I went to the kitchen. Leo looked up from his plate. Who is that grandpa? He asked. That was your father, Leo, I said. He is going to be staying with us for a while. He is starting a new job on Monday. Is he the boss? Leo asked. No, I smiled. He is learning how to work. I sat down and ate my breakfast. The war was over. The rebuilding had begun. And for the first time, I knew my legacy wasn't in the name on the building. It was in the sweat on my son's brow. The bankruptcy auction of Ford Logistics was not held in a courtroom. It was held in a windowless conference room at a law firm downtown, conducted with the sterile brutality of a slaughterhouse. I was not there physically. I sent Atticus Black. I sat in my truck outside drinking coffee from a thermos, watching the rain wash the city streets. I visualized the scene inside. The vultures were gathered. Private equity firms from New York liquidation specialists who wanted to chop up the fleet and sell it for parts, and competitors looking to buy our client list for pennies. They were all licking their chops, expecting a feeding frenzy. But they did not know about the liens. They did not know that every single asset from the staplers to the semi-trucks was encumbered by a priority debt holder who had first right of refusal. That debt holder was Phoenix Holdings, and Phoenix Holdings was me. Atticus texted me at 10 o'clock. It is done. The bid was accepted. We bought the debt. We bought the brand. We bought the building. Total cost was 4 cents on the dollar. I put the truck in gear. It was time to go to work. I drove to the headquarters. The glass tower looked different today. It looked humbled. The logo on the sign, Ford Logistics, seemed to be peeling, though I knew it was just my imagination. I parked in the spot marked Chairman, the spot Brandon had painted over with his own name just a week ago. I walked into the lobby. The security guard, old Mike, was sitting behind the desk, looking like he was waiting for the executioner. He saw me and stood up confused. Mr. Ford, he asked. I heard you were banned. Not anymore, Mike, I said. I am the new management. I took the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was packed. The remaining board members, the ones who hadn't resigned in shame, were sitting there with the bankruptcy trustees and the lawyers. They were waiting for the representative of Phoenix Holdings. They were terrified. They expected a corporate raider, someone who would fire them all and strip the copper wiring from the walls. I pushed the heavy double doors open. The conversation stopped instantly. Every head turned. Marcus Thorne, the venture capitalist who had fired Brandon, dropped his pen. Garrison, Marcus asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and annoyance. What are you doing here? This is a closed meeting for the new owners. Security should have stopped you. I walked to the head of the table. I didn't look at Marcus. I looked at the empty chair. The leather was worn where I had sat for 20 years. It looked like an old friend. I sat down. Mr. Ford, the bankruptcy trustee, said, standing up, "You have no standing here. Phoenix Holdings has acquired the assets. We are waiting for Mr. Black." "I am Phoenix Holdings," I said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Marcus turned pale. The other board members exchanged glances of pure panic. They realized in that split second that they weren't dealing with a stranger. They were dealing with the man they had betrayed. Atticus walked in a moment later, carrying a briefcase. He smiled at the room, a shark entering a tank of goldfish. "Good morning, everyone," Atticus said. "I believe you know the chairman." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished wood. "You fired me," I said softly. "You looked at my son, a boy with no experience and no moral compass, and you chose him because you thought he would make you rich. You thought I was old. You thought I was in the way. You thought you could steal my life's work, and I would just go home and play bingo." I stood up and walked around the table. I stopped behind Marcus. "You were wrong," I whispered. Marcus swallowed hard. "Garrison, it was business. We had a fiduciary duty. Your duty was to the company," I said, "not to a thief. You saw the numbers. You saw the spending. You looked the other way because the stock was going up. That is not duty. That is complicity." I walked back to the head of the table. "This is a hostile takeover," I announced. "But it is not corporate. It is personal. As the sole owner of Phoenix Holdings, which now owns 100% of the assets and intellectual property of this firm, I am dissolving the board." "Dissolving?" Marcus sputtered. "You can't just—" "I just did," I said. "You are all fired, effective immediately. Get out of my building." They scrambled. It was a stampede of expensive suits and bruised egos. They grabbed their briefcases and phones, avoiding my eyes, running for the door, as if the room were on fire. When they were gone, the room was quiet. Just me and Atticus. "Clean sweep," Atticus said. "Not quite," I said. I pressed the intercom button on the phone. "Jerry, are you down there?" "Yes, sir," came the crackling reply from the fleet manager I had ignored for 3 days. "Unlock the gates, Jerry," I said. "Reboot the servers. Send a message to the drivers. Tell them the hold is lifted. Tell them they are getting a 10% raise for their trouble. And tell them to start their engines." "Yes, sir," Jerry shouted. I walked to the window. Below me in the massive lot, the trucks began to roar to life. 500 diesel engines waking up at once. It sounded like thunder. It sounded like music. I watched the smoke rise from the stacks. The company wasn't dead. It was just purged. I had burned down the rot to save the roots. But there was one last piece of business. I looked down at the loading dock at the rear of the facility. The shift change was happening. A line of men in orange vests was walking through the security gate. At the back of the line, walking with his head down, wearing a vest that was 2 sizes too big, was Brandon. He looked tired. He looked broken. He stopped at the checkpoint and swiped his new badge. The light turned green. He walked through the turnstile and headed toward Bay 4, where a supervisor was waiting to assign him a broom. I watched my son pick up the broom. I watched him start to sweep the concrete floor. He wasn't the chairman anymore. He wasn't the heir. He was just a man working for a living. I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't pity. It was hope. I turned away from the window. I had a company to run. And for the first time in a long time, the view from the top didn't look lonely. It looked clear. The concrete floor of the distribution center is unforgiving at 4 in the morning. It is cold, hard, and smells of diesel fumes and stale coffee. This is the belly of the beast, the place where the real work happens, far away from the heated leather seats of the executive boardroom. I walked onto the floor holding a plastic bag. I saw him standing near the time clock. Brandon. He looked like a ghost of the man who had stood on a stage a week ago. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn to my house on Saturday, but they were washed now, wrinkled and faded. He had shaved, but his face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and the crushing weight of hitting rock bottom. He was standing with his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself invisible among the other men who were arriving for the early shift. These were rough men, strong men, men who knew the value of $1 because they traded their backs for it. They looked at Brandon with suspicion. They knew who he was. They knew he was the one who had almost cost them their jobs. I walked up to him. The chatter in the room died down. The men watched. They were waiting to see if I was going to hug him or fire him again. I didn't do either. I handed him the plastic bag. "Put these on," I said. Brandon opened the bag. Inside was a pair of steel-toed boots, heavy work gloves, and a high-visibility orange vest. The vest didn't say chairman. It didn't say CEO. It had a patch on the chest that read Level 1. He sat down on a metal bench and took off his Italian loafers. He put on the heavy boots. He laced them up. His hands were shaking, but he didn't complain. He stood up and put on the vest. It was too big for him. He looked like a child playing dress-up, but there was nothing playful about the fear in his eyes. "You report to Mike," I said, pointing to the shift supervisor, a man Brandon had once yelled at for parking his truck in the wrong spot. "Mike is the boss. If he tells you to sweep, you sweep. If he tells you to lift, you lift. You get a 30-minute break for lunch. You do not have an office. You do not have an assistant. You have a quota." "I understand," Brandon whispered. "Good," I said. "Now get to work." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I went up to my office, the real office, the one with the view of the floor. I watched on the monitors. I watched my son, the former master of the universe, pick up a broom. I watched him struggle with a pallet jack. I watched Mike yell at him for stacking crates too high. And I watched Brandon for the first time in his life simply nod and fix his mistake. He worked for 10 hours. By noon, he was sweating through his shirt. By 2 o'clock, he was limping. He had blisters on his hands. He looked exhausted. He looked miserable. But he was still there. He hadn't walked off the job. He hadn't called a lawyer. He was doing the work. At 4 o'clock, the school bus dropped Leo off at the front gate. I went down to meet him. Leo is 7, bright-eyed and full of questions. He held my hand tightly. We walked through the warehouse. The noise was deafening, the clatter of conveyor belts and the beep of forklifts. "Grandpa, where are we going?" Leo asked. "We are going to see your dad," I said. "Is he in his big office?" Leo asked. "No," I said. "He is working." We walked to the loading dock. Bay 4. There was a line of trucks waiting to be loaded. I saw Brandon. He was inside the back of a semi-trailer stacking heavy boxes of auto parts. His face was streaked with grime. His orange vest was stained. He was heaving a box onto a stack, his muscles straining, his breath coming in short gasps. He turned and saw us. He froze. He saw his son holding my hand. He saw me standing there in my suit, the owner of the company. For a second, I thought I saw shame in his eyes. I thought he would try to hide, but he didn't. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. He looked at Leo, and he smiled. It wasn't the fake, polished smile of the gala. It was a tired, real human smile. "Daddy," Leo shouted, waving. "Hi, buddy," Brandon called back. He didn't come over. He couldn't. The line was moving. He turned back to the box. He lifted it. He placed it. He kept working. Leo looked up at me. "He looks dirty, Grandpa." "He is," I said. "That is what honest work looks like, Leo. It is dirty. It is hard. But it is real. Your dad is building something today." "What is he building?" Leo asked. "Character," I said. We stood there for a long time watching him. I saw the other workers start to help him. I saw Mike pat him on the back, not as a subordinate, but as a member of the crew. I saw my son becoming a man. I realized then that I hadn't lost my family. I had forged it in the fire. Vanessa was gone, a casualty of her own greed. But Brandon was here. He was at the bottom, yes. But the bottom is the only place where you can find solid ground. I squeezed Leo's hand. "Come on," I said. "Let's go home. We have to make dinner for your dad. He is going to be hungry." We walked out of the warehouse into the late afternoon sun. The rain had stopped. The air was fresh. I looked back at the building one last time. Ford Logistics was gone. Phoenix Holdings had risen. And inside, sweating and aching, my son was finally earning his name. I spent 40 years building a logistics empire thinking I was securing a legacy for my son. But I was wrong. I was building a cage of entitlement that trapped him. True love isn't about shielding your children from the storm. It is about teaching them how to sail the ship. By stripping Brandon of his unearned power, I gave him back his dignity. It took hitting rock bottom for us to find solid ground. Money can buy a lot of things, but it cannot buy the self-respect that comes from a hard day's work. That you have to earn. If you believe that second chances are earned, not given, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption. Let me know in the comments, would you have hired your son back?